Hello, you're watching Talking Europe. A few months ago, Georgians were in the streets celebrating the EU's decision to give their country candidate status to join the bloc. But if the right hand is moving towards Europe, the left hand is pulling in a different direction entirely. A draft law has passed in Georgia's parliament, ostensibly aimed at promoting transparency around foreign funding of organizations. Critics say the foreign influence law smacks of clampdowns in Russia, Hungary and other countries, and that it will be used to stifle free expression and open debate ahead of Georgia's parliamentary elections slated for this October. Today we host perhaps the most outspoken advocate for Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration, its president, Salomé Zourabichvili, who joins us from Tbilisi. President, thank you for being our guest once again. It's worth explaining to our viewers first why this law is different from transparency laws in the West, let's say, because Foreign Agents Registration Acts, that exists in the US. We have this kind of legislation in France. But what's going on in Georgia, it's not that same kind of law, is it?
No, it's an exact copy of the law that was passed by Russia, and which allowed Russia to clamp down on the non-governmental organizations first and on the media then. And it's exactly the Georgian authorities that have pushed this law for the second time after having last year declined to go forward with it, now are reproposing the same law, and their aim and objective is no different. It's to limit the activities of these non-governmental organizations, and the declaration by the president of the party, Mr. Ivanishvili, is to that effect, is very, very clear that he has made in front of the activists that were called in Tbilisi by the ruling Georgian Dream. He just recognizes that it's to control better the non-governmental organization, the international organizations also, and all of that in view, first of all, of the next elections in October.
You will veto the bill, presumably, when it comes to your office, and then Parliament will override that veto because the ruling party has that majority, correct?
That's correct. It must be said also that this bill has already been vetoed by all the people that come out on the streets, especially the Georgian youth, but not only, a very vast majority of people that have been for 15 days now protesting the different stages of the adoption of this law, which of course I'm going to veto, as I have vetoed and I've declared that I would veto any law that is going against the recommendations that were formulated by the European Union in view of granting Georgia the possibility to open negotiations for adhesion as it did with Ukraine and Moldova. So it's a very big stake, and we have no right, I think, and that's what the Georgian population thinks, we have no right to let that chance pass by.
You think we could be heading towards a paralysis of the country, which would then make the government change course?
I think that this government, and I think by now it's quite clear that they are not going to change course. I think that we have a very responsible youth and also opposition that is very concerned with the stability of the country. We know that in this country, any instability can be used by our northern neighbor. So I think everybody is responsible, and that the answer to this law and many other laws and many anti-European, anti-Western rhetoric by the governing ruling party will be in the elections. We have elections on October 26th of this year, and now it's very clear that the elections will be a type of referendum for or against Europe. What type of future do we want for Georgia?
You mentioned Bidzina Ivanishvili earlier. He's the éminence grise of Georgian politics, the founder of Georgian Dream, a former prime minister of Georgia. Let's take a listen to his speech in Tbilisi on April the 29th.
From the start of 2022 to the present day, Georgia has endured a difficult fight to avoid war and preserve peace. Despite the promises of the 2008 Bucharest summit, Georgia and Ukraine have not been accepted into NATO and have been left out to dry. All of those decisions are made by the global party of war, which has a decisive influence on NATO and the EU, and for which Georgia and Ukraine are cannon fodder. In 2008, they forced Georgia into a confrontation with Russia, and in 2014 and 2022, they put Ukraine in an even more difficult situation.
So he's using terms like the global party of war. Georgia is cannon fodder. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's very clear to hear that, and there were many other things in that speech. It's very clear that the anti-Western rhetoric is very also copied from the anti-Western rhetoric that you hear in Moscow. This invention of the party of war that supposedly would push Georgia into the war is something that has been used on and on by the ruling party. And that is something that is of a concern to the general population, that using that fear of war, they're trying to push us to some form of neutrality. That seems to be the aim and the objective of the ruling party and of Mr. Ivanishvili. But that is not the wish of the very vast majority of the Georgian population that for years and years now has been constantly supporting the European path, with 80% of all the opinion polls in favor, and that is not changing. To the contrary, because the granting of the candidate status to Georgia has only reinforced the sense that we are now close to the next stage, and that is a stage that nobody here wants to see escaping us.
There was a US State Department document a few months ago which documented what it called Russian influence operations in Georgia. Despite the opinion polls that you just mentioned of people being in favor of EU integration, are there still, would you say, a lot of soft targets in Georgia for this so-called hybrid warfare?
Well, there are soft targets, and we are in that region that the Soviet institutes and hence now the Russian institutes know quite well, psychologically, politically, so they know what instruments they can use. But on the other side, it's also true that the Georgian population is more immune than some of the Western populations to the Russian propaganda, because we've known it for very many long years. And so we know how they proceed, how they act. And I think that by now, everything is clear, and that the Georgians know that by October, they will have to say very clearly what they want for the future of this country. And again, with their feet, the Georgian youth has already voted, and they will probably vote in mass next October. I'm very confident, and I'm very hopeful.
Georgian Dream also said recently it was going to try to introduce a law banning the promotion of same-sex relationships and banning gender transitions. That kind of approach, do you think it will gain traction in a society which is still quite conservative in many ways, if we're talking about the election again?
It is and it is not. And I think that everybody, that's why I'm saying that it's a very aware population of what can be tested. And by now they know that they are going to use all the tricks of the Russian propaganda. And so nobody will be surprised, and everybody is preparing themselves for that type of propaganda that will be developed on the coming months. So that's not something that is very scary or very new or not expected. And the main thing is that when you expect things, they do not appear so frightening.
President, I've got a question about one of your predecessors, Mikhail Saakashvili, because since the last time you and I spoke, MEPs in the European Parliament released a statement saying that the way Mr. Saakashvili is being treated is a litmus test of the Georgian government's commitments to European values, and they actually go as far as to urge you to use your constitutional rights to pardon him. They say that would reduce political polarization in the country. What do you think of all that?
Well, I think that the European MPs are a bit late on the events because they're still invoking the humanitarian issue, which was a concern for me also. But by now it's very clear that Mr. Saakashvili has no medical problem any longer. He's using very effectively and with the support of the ruling party the trial to really make political speeches. And what is very clear here, and that's why probably the European MPs are a bit disconnected from the Georgian reality, is that the very much majority of the population doesn't want to see a comeback of Saakashvili and of his party and of the authoritarian rule that characterized him, nor do they want today's ruling party and its pro-Russian and pro-authoritarian character to remain in power. So that is a choice that is open to the Georgian people. They want something new, they want something democratic, and they want something European. And that's what we're going to see in the next elections.
Thank you so much, President Salomé Zourabichvili, President of Georgia, joining me from Tbilisi. And of course, we will be closely covering that crucial election in Georgia in October here on France 24. Thanks for watching.